Let's turn to South Africa now, where violent protests have erupted, with frustrated locals taking to the streets marching against illegal migration. This has been building in South Africa for weeks now, with organisers vowing to march every Thursday until undocumented migrants are removed. The government is cracking down. More than 53,000 immigrants have been deported in the space of a month, and authorities say that more than 80% of the immigrants sent home were from Malawi. Joining us now is Daniel Swift, Senior Research Analyst for Economics, Finance and Trade at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Daniel Swift, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. What's the latest?
Thank you so much for having me on.
What's the latest on the situation in South Africa, and why is this happening?
Yeah, as you can see from the clips, the anger among these people is real. It's tangible. I would just argue it's directed at the wrong people in many ways. Since the presidency of Jacob Zuma, which was about 2008 to 2019, the economy has deteriorated. Public services has suffered. You might have heard about rolling blackouts in South Africa. And, ordinary South Africans have seen members of the ruling African National Congress get richer and richer through corruption. So that anger hasn't gone away. It's stewed, and now it's being directed at migrant communities, mostly from countries nearby, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, but also against people as far north as Ghana and Nigerians that are also in the country.
You spent nearly 3 years posted in South Africa as a diplomat. Does what we're seeing now feel like a shift?
So in some ways, it's a great question. South Africa has had a lot of bouts of xenophobic violence since the end of apartheid in 1994, most recently in 2021 and 2022, but even as far back really as 2023. As 2003. What's new about today is they're more organized than they were in the past. These aren't bouts of mob violence kind of spurred randomly in township areas. These are much more organized, and they're also in sync with an electoral schedule. South Africa's having local elections in November. And I think what we're starting to see is with the fall of the ANC's political fortunes, it's opened up a lot of space for, let's call them policy entrepreneurs, or people to take up issues and to effectively try and gain power on them after they've watched ANC leaders get rich through the exercise of political power. So the difference this time around is the scale, but also the organization associated with these protests.
Just drawing on your time in South Africa, how deep did tensions over migration and economic pressure run?
They're very, very deep. South Africa has an unemployment rate about one out of three. All South Africans are unemployed. It's much higher if you look at the rate for the Black population and the youth population. So it's important to understand that people are really, really frustrated. President Ramaphosa has mostly tried to kind of control the situation without solving the underlying problems. He's acknowledged that Department of Home Affairs has, allowed weak borders and has made mistakes with documentation and paperwork and has been backed up. But at this point, I don't think he's really trying to solve the problem. He's trying to ride out this wave of violence like in previous waves without addressing the underlying anger that's still there.
Is deporting more than 50,000 migrants in a month enough to calm this anger?
It won't be. And if you look at the total estimated number of migrants in South Africa, you're looking at about 2.5 million. So you're really talking about a very small fraction of people that have been deported. And most of these folks have self-deported on buses to places like Malawi and Mozambique and Zimbabwe. And what I hear from my contacts in the country is that many people are just hoping to lay low and ride this out and see what happens. But the March and March movement and other leaders of these protests, a woman named Jacinda Sissobile Zuma, has said they're going to hold these rallies every Thursday, which assures that this will be at the top of the agenda up into election season, which takes place again in early November. So I'm more worried about the situation getting worse if the underlying concerns of the protesters aren't addressed. I think all of us in countries with immigration, we want fair rules that are reasonably enforced. And I think given the high rates of unemployment, that's going to be a tough sell for the ANC in the run up to these November elections.
Is there a left-wing group that believes in open borders?
It's certainly not very popular right now. I think most of the momentum is on the side of more strict enforcement. South Africa has always seen itself as a beacon of economic development and of human rights among the countries in Africa. So it's always had some proclivity towards open borders. And of course, there's long-standing connections between the African National Congress and many of the governments in places like Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and even Nigeria and Ghana, who helped the ANC resistance to apartheid. I don't think South Africa likes the idea of this coming up in diplomatic forums. You know, Ghana has threatened to make this a topic at the AU summit coming up, and Nigeria is asking for restitution for its citizens who lost property in these actions. So it's a bad look for South Africa. It hurts their vision of themselves as a leader on the continent. But I don't think there's a strong left-wing movement really pushing for open borders for South Africa. It's more of a function of a long-term mining economy where migrants used to come in from places like Malawi to work in the mines, and these patterns have repeated. It's just people are really frustrated there, and oftentimes they have very good reason to be frustrated.
And is this has it in any way been inspired by what we're also seeing take place in Europe and in America?
Yeah, you're seeing, I think it's a really good question. I would hesitate to draw, really firm lines between them. I think South Africa is always kind of its own unique situation. But certainly, South Africa is a messy, big, multiracial democracy, much like the Australia and the United States, that has a complicated past. And these types of tensions do arise, especially when there's failures to enforce laws and when unemployment rates hit, 33%, as high as 60 for the youth populations. There's a lot of very palpable frustration there.
You mentioned that protest organisers say that they plan to keep marching every Thursday until undocumented migrants are removed. Any indication that tensions may settle, or do you suspect that the tensions just may increase?
I worry that tensions will increase. Hopefully the South African police and Home Affairs will maintain a rule of law. The president Ramaphosa has said that mob violence or vigilante violence has no place in a constitutional democracy. He's right, but in lieu of doing anything to address these oftentimes very real concerns, it's difficult to see for me how this diffuses. And South Africa is headed towards a very interesting political season. It's already in unprecedented territory, with the ANC failing to secure a majority in the last election, so it's now sharing power with the Democratic Alliance. As the ANC, in my view, continues to decline in popularity, we will start to see other movements come up in South Africa. Now, some of those movements, like parts of the DA, I think would be pretty healthy for the country, but other parts, like the Economic Freedom Fighters, led by Julius Malema, or the MK Party, headed by allies of former President Jacob Zuma, could be very damaging. So as political space becomes open in South Africa, I anticipate that people will compete for it. And I think the incentive will be to stoke violence among those new upcomers, as opposed to trying to, introduce comprehensive solutions to what is a very, very difficult problem.
So it's likely that we could see greater violence?
I think it's likely, at least up until November's elections, although if you force me to be optimistic, I can say in the past that these flare-ups of violence have dissipated and wound down. But I think the dynamic is pretty strong in the townships and in a lot of the areas that are suffering economically. and it's going to be a rocky season up until at least November, but I'm hoping for calm.
Daniel Swift, Senior Research Analyst for Economics, Finance and Trade at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gabriella.